Thank you, Chair Grijalva, for including H.R. 3225, the Restoring Community Input and Public Protections in Oil and Gas Leasing Act, in today's markup. I also want to thank my friend Chairman Lowenthal for all his work to advance the legislation. H.R. 3225 would protect taxpayers by eliminating non-competitive oil and gas leasing, requiring companies to pay a fee to nominate lands for leasing, and raising the onshore oil and gas royalty rate, rental fee, and the minimum bid amount. Currently, our oil and gas leasing program provides a sweetheart deal for the oil and gas industry at the expense of the American taxpayer. And the industry isn't afraid to tout the great deal they're receiving at our expense. An October 2019 press release put out by Matador Resources Company outlined the many benefits of extraction on public land compared to private land. These benefits include leases that are cheaper, that last longer, and that are more expansive. The royalty rate on public lands hasn't gone up in more than 100 years. Private landowners in states, including Utah, Wyoming, Montana, New Mexico, and Colorado, all have higher rates. Increasing the royalty rate to a fair level will generate billions of dollars in revenue for taxpayers. The Government Accountability Office and Congressional Budget Office both agree and have suggested it is good policy. It's very clear that companies have found easy ways to game the current oil and gas program. A November 2018 New York Times article described how a London-based oil and gas company secured the drilling rights to more than 60,000 acres of federal land at bargain basement prices by nominating them for sale and then scooping them up via a non-competitive lease. The company got rights to the land for $1.50 per acre, or as the article described it, less than the price of a cup of coffee. A surge in lease sales under the Trump administration has made these giveaways possible. When more acreage is put up for sale, more acreage is available non-competitively after it doesn't receive a bid. As a result, the oil and gas industry is sitting on more than 11 million non-producing acres of public land. These policies have real consequences. It's much more difficult for that land to go to other important uses like recreation and conservation. The status quo cannot continue. We need to ensure that taxpayers get a fair return. While the Trump administration enacts these policies to support industry, it also has abandoned communities impacted by oil and gas development by cutting them out of the land management decision process. H.R. 3225 seeks to address the administration's actions by encouraging public participation in the leasing process. It requires the federal government to proactively work with state agencies, private landowners, local governments, tribal communities, and other stakeholders. Oil and gas drilling can be detrimental to nearby communities. It degrades air quality, can pollute local water sources, and can have long-term impacts on residents' health. To force these consequences on communities without adequate engagement is beyond irresponsible. It's just plain wrong. The Trump administration continues to undermine community consultation requirements as it seeks to blow up NEPA, most recently with its proposal to roll back the rules for oil and gas drilling on U.S. Forest Service lands. That proposed rule excludes the public from the process that determine which lands are managed by the agency and which will be open for oil and gas extraction. It's an echo of the efforts we're seeing all across resource agencies under this administration, and it's unacceptable. Ultimately, the current system is rigged for the benefit of the oil and gas industry to the detriment of most Americans. My legislation begins to change that. However, you may hear my colleagues across the aisle inaccurately claim that some of the common sense fixes in my bill are too difficult, unworkable, or detrimental. For example, they may say that shortening lease terms from 10 years to 5 years does not give companies enough time to work through the Bureau of Land Management's red tape. I would respond that the long lease gives companies more time to collect information about surrounding resources, thus incentivizing them to start production later. That is a timeline that favors industry over the taxpayer. My colleagues on the other side may also say that eliminating non-competitive leasing will hurt taxpayers by reducing revenue. I would respond that the CBO only found 3% of non-competitive leases issued between 1996 and 2003 were developed by the end of their primary term. That means the vast majority of these lands were locked up and not available for uses that would actually have benefited taxpayers. And lastly, my colleagues may claim that the legislation would export our domestic energy production overseas, where it is not subject to the same degree of environmental rules. I would remind them that the United States is a net exporter of oil and gas. Their argument is just an excuse to attack policies that don't benefit oil and gas. If it was a serious argument, we'd see an effort to put an export ban back in place. We'd also see widespread support on the other side of the aisle for the efforts like those being implemented in the state of California to reduce oil consumption through deployment of more fuel efficient cars and trucks. Instead, we see a tax on efforts to increase efficiency. With all of this in mind, I urge support for my Restoring Community Input and Public Protections in Oil and Gas Leasing Act. Let's fight giveaways to the oil and gas industry and restore fairness for the American taxpayer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.